In this video, I'm going to show you some mistakes that I see beginner potters make when trying to throw tall, and I'm going to give you some strategies on how to fix them. So, let's get started. Okay, so after you have learned the basics, at some point you're going to want to learn to start throwing things that are a little bit taller. And there are some roadblocks that I see that people run into as they try to do this. As we run through some of these, they might not be exactly where you're at, but hopefully some of them will resonate with you. So the first one is that their clay isn't actually completely centered prior to starting. So when you do this, if your clay is wobbling around, like you can see it wobbling, or when you put your hands on it, if it doesn't feel still under your hands, then it's not centered yet. Right, and you need to go back to centering it. And one of the key things about this that you got to do first is you got to make sure that the clay is soft enough that you can actually center it. Right, so if it's too hard, it's going to be really hard to center. So the softer the clay is, the easier it's going to be to center, and the easier it's going to be to make your well and open it up. But if it's too soft, it's going to be hard to pull the walls up, like they won't want to stay up. Okay, because it absorbs too much of the water. So you want to kind of find the middle ground, and this is hard to tell you exactly what it is because it's a little bit different for most people, but it should give under your hand, right? It shouldn't feel hard to move. Like if you feel like you have to like lean into this or press like super hard to do anything with it, it's probably too hard. Your clay's probably too hard. Okay, so make sure that you're getting soft clay. Make sure you're anchoring your elbows into your thighs. All right, if you leave your arms up in the air, you're gonna shake around everywhere. I have a video on how to center and on how to pull, and I'll have those linked in the description. So I'm not gonna run through the whole like how to do that part, but just keep in mind that if you're wondering how do I get my clay to be taller, first you need to make sure that it's actually centered before you go pulling it, okay? And remember, when you center clay, you're pressing in, you're pushing in, and you're pressing down, and you're doing this at the same time. And you're not just doing it randomly. So sometimes people will do this, they'll lean in, and then they just push down, and they know they're supposed to do both motions, but they just smash the clay, and they're not actually feeling for what's happening. So when you do this, you want to feel for the wall. As you lean in, you want to feel for the wall to become still, right? And then as you press down, you want to feel for the top. You want to feel for the top to become still. So you're waiting for that feeling, and if it doesn't come, repeat the process, right? Don't just keep smushing it down. So lean in and then press down. It's the same thing if you're coning too, right? You cone up and you cone back down. You cone up and you cone back down until you feel the clay under your hands stop moving. So at this point, the clay is centered, right? And we can move on to the well, okay? And again, just before we move on, make sure your well is centered. You need to feel for the middle, and then you need to follow this down. I like to use 2 fingers, but make sure your elbows are braced, because if they're not, you're gonna be wiggling all over the place, okay? And then when we get to the bottom, okay, when you're ready to open this up again, make sure your elbows are braced, and you're just you're curling your fingers toward yourself to open the bottom up. You're just curling them like that. Okay, but like this way. Okay, and you should end up with a flat bottom. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do when you're trying to throw taller pieces is you need to make sure that your stuff is centered. Okay, because if it's not centered, then it won't matter, right? Later it'll be a lot harder to pull it up. Okay, so the next thing you need to do when you're trying to pull your walls taller, like if it's falling apart on you, is you want to collar this in. And again, I talked about this in another video, but every time you do a pull, right? Let's say you do a pull, the clay naturally wants to come out. right? And so you have to kind of fight that. And if you're not used to that at first, then every pull, you should be collaring your clay in. And to do this, all you're gonna do is you're gonna take your clay on both sides and you're gonna pull it in. And you're usually gonna start with the top. You can start with the body and then move up, but remember that wherever the rim goes, the top, the body has to follow. So kind of like your own body, like wherever your head goes, your body has to follow that. Wherever the rim of the pot goes, the body of the pot has to follow. So we pull this in, and then we pull this in, right? And you can see that as we pull it in, it actually gets taller because it's thinner, okay? And then when we go to do the next pull, we pull it out, okay? And it should, if we have pulled it in, like at an angle, it should correct to be straight, okay? And then if you want, you can pull it in again, collar it in, compress the rim, okay? And you go from there. Okay. The third tip is for people who are pulling, right? And this is probably gonna be where a lot of people are, is I have students that when they're pulling, they pull and they want to pull a lot of clay and then they rip it just like that, okay? So if this is you and you're in this place, let me talk you through what's happening, okay? So when you're pulling the clay up, and remember, you're pushing the wall out from the inside and you're pinching the clay up, right? What you actually want to be doing is you want to be pushing the wall out and you want to be carrying it, like lifting it. So all this hand pushes it out, right? And this hand just carries that bump all the way up, okay? And what you're doing, the reason it's ripping is because you're pressing really hard in here. You're trying to carry too much clay at one time. And what's happening is it's getting really weak here, and then the clay on the top is thicker, and so it's twisting and shearing off as you go up, okay? So if your clay keeps ripping off, okay, it is because you're trying to pull too much. If your clay gets off center at the top, it's because somewhere along the line, either it wasn't centered before, or somewhere along the line you got off center because these hands came apart, right? And the pressure changed. And then, so instead of pulling so much, focus on pulling a little bit less, so maybe that much. And instead of focusing on pinching, focus on lifting. It doesn't matter if you saw my video on pulling or you saw my video on the techniques that every beginner probably should know, then you know that you're just carrying this bump. And so all you need to do, it doesn't really matter, it doesn't matter how fast the wheel goes, really. It just matters that these hands don't move, right? All you're doing is you're lifting, and then once you get to the top, lighten up pressure. And then repeat the process, okay? So we're gonna collar in. And actually you see me here starting from the bottom and working my way up, and you can do that too. But if you have a pot that's really difficult or getting taller, then you may wanna start at the top. Okay. At some point, you're gonna have to lift your elbow, right? So it starts getting taller, you wanna lift your elbow. But the goal here is we're just trying to make a cylinder, because every pot starts with a cylinder. And so all we're gonna do is we're going to lift. The last thing that I'm gonna tell you to do in order to get a nice tall cylinder, and remember that every shape pretty much in pottery starts with a cylinder, or at least can start with a cylinder, is there's a bunch of clay here at the bottom, and you can tell because it looks thicker, right? And most people, this is where they leave a bunch of their clay, right? So this clay down here is wasted if we don't push it back into the wall, okay? And this can be kind of tricky to do, all right? So what I like to do is take my sponge, and just from the outside, really, I'm gonna dig in underneath like this, and I'm gonna push a little notch all the way in from the bottom. And you can see it kind of gets off a little bit, and if you lose a little bit of clay, it's okay, right? But now, from the inside, we're going to
lift that notch of clay. And it should, in theory, go into our wall.
Okay, so I want to be really transparent here. These are all skills that I see people do, or all things that I see people do that I think they could adjust. But these are also skills. They're also things that come with practice, like knowing how much clay you should pull up at a time without ripping your pot apart. Just comes with practice. It comes with ruining a few pots, and you kind of have to be willing to go through the process and ruin a few, and knowing how much or how hard to press in at the bottom before it's going to distort your piece. Again, that comes at the more you do this, the easier it becomes. But those are the things that you should be looking out for as you continue on in this process. So if you're having a hard time pulling cylinders up or getting a little bit more height with your clay, these could be some of the places that you are having difficulty. And I think being aware of them can really help you in the process. So that brings us pretty much to the end of this video. And if you've made it this far, thanks so much for watching. If you haven't already liked and subscribed, please do so. As I shape this pot, I just want to tell you about my print club that I've started called the Collectors Club. The Collectors Club is a snail mail print club. And for just $10 a month, you'll get a signed print, a letter from me, and a discount code for anything in my online store, including apparel, prints, and any original work. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, or if you like beautiful things in your mail every month, consider subscribing to the Collectors Club. Anyone who signs up this month will be on the list to get next month's prints. The link will be in the description below. Thanks again so much for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.